just had the chance to play Atomfall, first time. Can you walk me through where the idea came from for this game?
Okay, so the initial idea for Atomfall came from Jason Kingsley, one of the founders and owners of Rebellion. What he observed is there are a lot of games set in kind of nuclear quarantine zones. It's almost like a genre within itself, but there weren't any set around the world's first major nuclear disaster, which was the Windscale fire. So that was the very initial point, was to think what would a game set in that environment around that disaster look like. So we combined that with the kind of Rebellion creative DNA, which tends to be built around giving the player an objective in a sandbox environment, giving them freedom how to achieve it, and sort of the intersection of those two objectives eventually turned into Atomfall as we see it now.
Yeah, so I got to the village area, Wyndham Village, and I was just so impressed by how many stories were starting to really like intersect there. Was that always the intent with Atomfall, to have kind of all these separate stories and stories that tie into each other, or did some of that just happen as you were developing the game?
Yeah, some of that emerged over time. An earlier version of the game had much more of a kind of linear structure to it, almost like a Metroidvania game, right? So some freedom, but then gated towards next sandbox. We found that even that was too structured. It felt like we wanted to make it more free, to really double down on that kind of Rebellion creative DNA. So we asked ourselves, what happens if we unlock all the doors and let the player go wherever they want right from the start of the game? And then to solve that problem, a load of game mechanics emerged over time. We developed them over time. So we don't have a traditional quest system. We've got leads instead, so you're structured more like a detective. What that meant is that we wanted to find a way to lead the player from any part of the game to any other, to make sure they understand how it all fits together. And as a result, all of our narratives became kind of interwoven, interconnected. So it means that no matter where you access the story, you can piece together an understanding of how it all fits together.
That's so cool. Yeah, that was so well done. I was just talking to everyone, and we all had different experiences all over the place. It was really neat.
Yeah. What we found as well is that the place that you come into a story makes you feel different about the characters and how the world fits together. You might make different choices based on kind of judgment calls you make as you play, and then as you learn more, you think, oh, maybe that wasn't the best call.
Because already, I did the priest and the Macy quest and Morris, the shopkeep, and I was like, I don't even know who to side with here. But I imagine if you do that later on with more information, yeah, that's so cool.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one of the things we aimed for is that effectively, the more you learn about the situation, kind of the worse it gets. Like it gets more and more morally murky, and it gets more difficult to make a call. You've got to decide whether you want to like compromise your principles to survive, or whether you want to stick to those principles and make life harder for yourself. Yeah. There's no good guys and bad guys. There's just different perspectives on how to survive this situation. And yeah, that was a creative challenge, but a fun one to really get our teeth into.
Yeah. And then a couple of the cool mechanics I noticed was the stamina system, the heart rate, and the flashlight, like highlighting items. How did you come up with those, or was that like, what was the process of that?
So the stamina system, or the heart rate system rather, we have a version of in Sniper Elite, and that impacts your ability to aim your gun. So it felt like we could build on that system, but put it in a different context to give the player a feeling of Rebellion, like creative style, I guess, like house style, but then have a different experience through it. So that seemed like a natural fit. We did have a traditional stamina system at one point, but it just seemed like a more interesting flip to do it like a heart rate system.
Yeah.
And then the flashlight, the torch, what we wanted to do is make sure the player didn't need it, and that they could explore anywhere without it, but then give them a benefit for using it. So that was, given that you're trying to survive and craft materials and that resources are scarce, we wanted to give you that little bit of help, so you point the torch and it makes items glint as you explore.
That's cool. The crafting and the items, it felt really streamlined for a game like this. Like it felt like some survival elements, but also not overwhelming. What was it like balancing all that?
That was a huge balancing act for sure. What we wanted to do is make sure that the player could play through the entire game and keep their play session in their head, if that makes sense. So it's like an experience. The narrative is like the size of like a mini series or something like that, like an 8-episode TV show with a beginning, middle, and an end that the player can piece it all together in their head. So that had a huge influence on loads of mechanics in the game. So the amount that the player's skills influence how they play is quite constrained. The number of different crafting materials is quite limited, so that you always feel a little bit of pressure. You always feel like you might give yourself a bit of an edge, but not a lot. There's not a huge power creep by the end because we want you to stay engaged with that kind of pressure and tension. So yeah, had huge ripple effects through the whole game.
Are there difficulties I didn't see?
There's something like difficulties. There's play styles, which is effectively difficulties but for different aspects of the game. So you can choose how much pressure there is on the crafting and economy side of things.
Awesome.
You can choose how
I'm an
intense...
economy enthusiast in video
Right.
games. It's like my favorite thing.
Right, okay. So you'll want to leave that difficult then. Yeah. Combat, you can make it a little bit easier on yourself because it defaults to challenging. We want it to be a tense experience where you have to pay attention, but we know that's not right for everyone. So we recommend that, but we don't force you. And then there's the amount of guidance in the game. We default to wanting the player to explore and pay attention to the world. But some players want that guidance. They just want to know what the next objective is. So if you wanted to, you could balance the game so that it's closer to a traditional adventure story kind of thing. But we think it's a more exciting experience when it's got that layer of tension and that layer of ambiguity.
Yeah, I found the ghouls in the tunnel. They were menacing. What is one of your favorite parts of developing the game? One of your favorite stories that you have, maybe?
Yeah, well, one of my favorite parts was finding a balance between melee and ranged combat, and giving you tools to survive without ammunition. So you can point an empty gun and people will back off. You can kick people and they'll stagger back.
The rats.
Yeah, you can crush rats as you stomp on them. We wanted to make sure it didn't feel like a run and gun game and that you had to stay engaged. So it's more like a detective story. And detectives stick their face somewhere it's not welcome and then they pay for it. So trying different things to find that balance was a lot of fun.
That's awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem.